Attention everybody, the views and opinions expressed on the show are not necessarily those of Acts Ministry, Acts Media Group, and or their affiliate and subordinate ministries and or nonprofits. So here he is, today, talking about verbal judo. It's crime time with Dr. Steve Albrecht. Take it away, Steve.
Thanks, Producer Matt. Welcome to Crime Time. This is Crime Time Podcast, episode 60. I'm Dr. Steve Albrecht, and I'm joining you from the Acts Media Group studios in Springfield, Missouri. For this hour, I'll be talking with Mike Ziggy Siegfried. He's the Chief Operating Officer for the Verbal Judo Institute, a training firm founded by the late Doctor George Thompson, who created the verbal judo concept, wrote a book about it called Verbal Judo, and taught it to thousands of law enforcement officers around the world, including me. Mike is the primary tactical communications instructor for the California Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, which is called POST. Mike spent 26 years working as a full-time peace officer in San Bernardino County. That's in California. He retired in July 18. He holds black belts in karate and mixed martial arts and is a court-recognized use of force expert. Mike's a published author in Police Magazine, the FBI National Academy Associate Magazine, Police Recruit Magazine, and Campus Security Magazine. So we'll be talking to him about verbal judo. Thanks for listening to Crime Time, where we talk about crime and crooks and cops and personal security. We talk about some dangerous people and lots of heroes. We'll even mention a few stupid crooks. Most importantly, I'll talk to you about what you can do to keep yourself and your family safe from crime and violence. As always, you need to be vigilant at home and in your neighborhood and in your community, and at school and at work and even on the road. This show exists to make you feel more empowered, more secure, and more educated on security issues and the criminal justice system. As background, I worked for the San Diego Police Department for 15 years as a patrol officer, a reserve sergeant, and a domestic violence investigator. I now work as a training consultant, teach training workshops focusing on human resources, employee coaching, workplace violence, and security issues in the workplace. I've written 24 books on business, workplace violence, police subjects, and guns, all of which you can find on Amazon. You can always reach me at my website, crimetimeradio.com. Send me an email. Connect with me on LinkedIn, and you can also follow me on Twitter at Dr. Steve Albrecht and also at LinkedIn, Dr. Steve Albrecht. Find past episodes of the show on SoundCloud.com, and also you can watch the YouTube Facebook stream as we do it live. So, Mike, thanks for being with me, pal. Long time no see. I haven't talked to you in a while. Hope you're doing well.
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, you know, I'm thinking about verbal judo as the concept as it came through San Diego Police Department. And am I right in guessing maybe 95 or 96, Doc came out to San Diego PD and did his program for everybody? Does that sound about right from your recollection, perhaps?
Yeah, from the historical archives, that'd probably be around the right time. He traveled all across the country and actually across the world and trained 1,000 different agencies. And I think we're right around 1 million officers trained worldwide.
Wow. And I remember, I think if I recall, he had worked for LAPD doing the training in LA Sheriffs before he came down to San Diego. Does that sound right? I think he did a lot of the LAPD, LA Sheriffs before he came to our agency.
Yeah, historically, California was probably the first large post state that embraced his training. He originally developed the training in the late 80s and then wrote an article for Chiefs of Police magazine called Rhetoric, a Powerful Tool for Law Enforcement. And out of that simple article that he wrote with some observations about how good police officers were at de-escalating. I mean, there wasn't even that kind of terminology at that time. So, and he really developed some of that, and then he started traveling all over the place. But California was the first state to really embrace verbal judo.
So I'm holding the book here, as we can see on the Facebook and the YouTube stream here. I've got my dog-eared copy, the original version here. I think I might have bought it from him at the training, but he was such an interesting guy, George Thompson, and I want to get kind of into the history of what he was all about, you know, as opposed to, you know, mostly about the concept. But I'm really interested in what he was about as a man. I thought the guy was an interesting character. And then also, you know, we'll talk about the history a little bit and also how it's not just, if you look at Verbal Judo Institute, your website, it's not just for cops. It's for hospitals and military and people in healthcare and folks with taxpayer contact jobs. And one of the things you and I have talked about over the years is how I teach the LEAPS model, the LEAPS acronym, to library people. And library people, that's sort of a shadow part of my consulting practice. I wrote a book on library security, and I've been doing library training for library people for 20 years. And Mike, you know who comes into the library. It's pedophiles, it's gang members, it's thieves, it's people experiencing homelessness, it's drug and alcohol enthusiasts. There's lots of people that come into the library, and these librarians, they're mostly introverts, oftentimes female, and they're stuck with having to deal with people that are abusive and rude. And so I've been teaching the concept to them and suggesting George's book, the Verbal Judo book, and also I think a decent companion book would be Crucial Conversations, the Patterson Grenny book that came out many years ago as well. Both of those books, yours and George's and Crucial Conversations, I think are useful for people in that field. So tell us about George Thompson as a man, his background. I mean, he was a Renaissance guy, a cop and a college professor, and so tell us more.
Yeah, first of all, we want to thank you for all your support and recommending our program and the Institute and our instructors for advanced training. We really appreciate that.
Sure.
Yeah, and a little bit about Doc. He's a very, very interesting individual. So basically, Dr. Thompson was a lifelong educator. He did his advanced doctorate work and some postdoctoral work at Princeton, and in the late 80s. In the late 80s, he was in Emporia, Kansas, teaching rhetoric, Shakespeare, Milton, all that fun stuff, running people through master's degrees programs. And he was kind of a dichotomy of a person because he was this hardcore academic, but he was also a weightlifter bodybuilder. And he had black belts in Judo and Taekwondo. So I don't know, he was like this strange mix of, a tough guy, academic, Clint Eastwood with a PhD, I guess.
I always call guys like that sort of scholar warriors. They're a scholar on one side and a warrior on the other. And I always say, the scholar never stops learning and the warrior never learns to stop, which is, that's kind of my life motto. I consider myself a scholar warrior as well. And so, just for our audience, the rhetoric, I mean, if I understand my own definition, that's kind of the study of argument and how people engage. And how would you define rhetoric as a subject?
Yeah, he talks about the art of persuading another individual, right? So it's convincing, persuading, having a pre-organized, verbal point of view. Aristotle, Milton, all those fun folks. So when he was in Kansas, he had he actually had a full-time police officer go through one of his college courses, and they ended up working out together, weightlifting. And the police officer said, "Listen, Doc, you like all this physical stuff? Because why don't you come and do a ride-along with me? Right? I think you like looking at police work." And after the ride-along, he fell in love with police work. He thought it was really super interesting. So what he decided to do is take a sabbatical from the college, put himself through a reserve police officer program, and then as an experiment, go out on patrol. And he didn't do very well because he wasn't very good at speaking to people. So that kind of got him in trouble. And that kind of surprised him because he had a PhD in persuasion and how to form arguments with people, but he wasn't communicating very well. And because he had so many troubles initially in talking to folks, he decided to get academic about it and start analyzing what good officers did to calm situations down. And he found that there was commonalities that had never been studied before. So he started to codify these commonalities, and then he would go to the officers and say, I noticed you did A, B, and C to calm this person down. They had a beer bottle and they were threatening us, and you said these few things, and you used your position, your proxemics position, and you changed things, and you changed your body language, and it really resolved the situation well. And where'd you learn it? And the officer kind of paused for a second. He goes, well, nobody really teaches it. You either learn it or you get hurt.
I think, if you look at his physical size, he was a big guy, and in law enforcement, we tend to hire, strapping men and women that can protect themselves and protect others. And I think that, we over rely on our bodies. At least in the old days, it was certainly true that we over rely on our bodies instead of our words. And I think he was one of the first guys to say, we've got to figure out a way to use our words. That the torn uniform and the police, blue wave of bodies smothering the guy until he stops wiggling around is always the solution, but it's not the best one. And I think he was one of the first guys to say, we got to be better with our mouth than our bodies.
Yeah, he had a term for it. He called it mind-mouth harmony.
Right.
And so he had he has so many great maxims. He says, one of his maxims was, it's not enough to do good. You've got to look good and sound good, or it's no good. Right, and that predated any body cameras or in-car cameras or cell cameras on cell phones or any of that stuff. But he understood that how we policed definitely affected how much support we were going to get, and whether or not, and how we spoke to individuals, and whether we showed them dignity or respect, had to do with whether or not, in 99 out of 100 cases, whether or not force needed to be used. And that was a pretty revolutionary concept when he initially proposed it, and it took a while for it to take hold. And that's really where the Verbal Judo Institute in California have a special relationship, because California's Peace Officer Standards Training, as you mentioned earlier, they embraced it way in the early 90s. And we've had an MOU since, I think, 1993 with California Post, and we still have that MOU today for our institute to share our trademark and copyrighted intellectual properties, things like leaps and everything else like that,
sure,
with the state of California. So we still enjoy that relationship with them.
Yeah, and certainly more information at verbaljudo.com if I didn't already mention the website. So, my sense of the topic and the way that, he trained it was that he had to do the usual, at least when I went through his training with him, he had to do the usual thing that a lot of instructors, and this, you're a veteran instructor, you have to overcome a lot of obstacles with cops. And I look at the groups that I train that are the most difficult, and, lawyers and judges would probably be right up there, number one. Doctors too, medical doctors, because they want everything in about an 8 minute, overview. I think, cops are so embarrassed about embarrassing themselves and in front of their peers, and they come in, and you've seen this a million times in your career, they come in with their sunglasses on, they sit in the back row and they have their arms folded and they go, this is BS. And so there's a whole, at least you have the benefit after all these decades of doing the program of people have knowledge of it, but back in the day I'm sure there was a huge leap that he had to go to get these people to say, pay attention to this stuff. We're talking about not only officer safety, because this will keep you from being injured or killed, but how you keep yourself out of the citizen complaint file and out of the internal affairs office, but talk about that sort of police reluctance, that sense that cops are too cool for school. I mean, you've seen it a million times.
Yeah.
The guys that don't take off their sunglasses the whole time during class, that kind of stuff.
Oh, absolutely. So talk about it like for all instructors, and I'll talk about what Doc faced and kind of how in my opinion how he overcame it. So in teaching, you got to remember, police officers are, many times you got that type A personality, and they take charge, and they're really into controlling the situation. And what can you teach me? So whenever I'm teaching other instructors, I tell them there's two things you got to answer for police officers pretty quick as an instructor. Number one, are you qualified to teach me? Because if a police officer doesn't feel that you're qualified to teach them, they're not going to listen to what you have to say.
Right.
And then the second question is, what's in it for me? If you can't very quickly, through your instruction, through your preamble, through your resume, and then your ability to articulate, if you can't do that very quickly, then you're going to lose officers. So those are the two key things. You're right. What Doc faced, and that's what a lot of folks who call him Dr. Thompson, they call him Doc or Doc Rhino. We'll talk about that later. What he faced was, a lot of crowds that says, it's why do we have to go jump through all these hoops to get people to be cooperative? They should have been cooperative in the first place. They're supposed to follow the rules. And one of the things that Dr. Well, first of all, I think it helped, like you said. Doc was a very dynamic instructor, to the point where, his nickname was Doc Rhino, because he would come in and just take over a room.
Right.
And you trained with him personally, and he was just super powerful, dynamic teacher, a big guy, double black belts. And then so highly educated. So he could take you on, physically if he needed to, but he could also take you on intellectually.
Right.
And basically what he did is the course is really a statement to the officers that everything in this program is going to help you. It's going to help you not fight, which is better for you because you never know, you might lose. And it'll help you not be in internal affairs investigations, and you will have a better relationship with the community because you'll be treating the community with the dignity and respect that they deserve. And one of, I think, the key things that we've been teaching this curriculum for 37 years. And the two primary things that we still teach that really the doc taught us to teach was that everyone deserves dignity and respect. And that if we treat everyone with dignity and respect, then 99 out of 100 cases, you're going to probably have a pretty good result. And that's really the cornerstone of what we have always taught and really what the focus of our training is now. Prior to his death in 2011, Dr. Thompson came up with what was called the 5 universal truths. And those 5 universal truths are everyone wants dignity and respect. People would rather be asked than being told to do something. People want to be told why they're being asked to do something. People want options, not threats. And when they make a mistake, let's say they came on too strong with you, or maybe they were a little verbally abusive with you, they want a second chance to remediate their behavior.
Right.
Everyone wants a second chance. He said if you treat everyone, especially people that you may not like, with those 5 universal truths, 99 out of 100 times you're going to have a good result for them and for you. And that's really the key focus of our training. And we've been around for 37 years because it resonates with officers, and it truly changes the way officers that embrace the program, it changes the way they police. I know it did for me. When
too.
I learned the system in 1992.
Me too.
It changed the way I police.
One of the things that he said that is so universal, and I mean, I say it to the library people, I say it to cops, because I teach, occasionally I'll teach a tactical communications program for cops, or I have, sort of in my clients, I have code compliance people, I have park rangers, I have lifeguards, I have people that are, parking controllers, that have that sort of pseudo-sworn thing, which is they're not sometimes fully sworn, but they still have to write tickets and things like that. And it's something he said in the book, and I want you to expand on the reason why that the phrase calm down has never worked in the history of mankind. It's never worked in the history of telling people who are not calm to calm down. I tell people all the time, whether it's a library environment or the field environment or over the counter, when you're dealing with somebody, you need to calm down, sir. I mean, that's never worked. First off, we say it with a little bit of a condescending edge in our voice, like we're talking to a child. And then the second is, what I think Doc said was in the book, and I'd like you to articulate this better, is that it interferes with this person's desire to have the right to be mad about the situation. So when you calm down, it's belittling. And so talk more about how the phrase calm down is one of the worst things to say.
Well, it shows absolutely zero empathy, because basically what you got is you got a person in front of you, and here's calm down's horrible on a lot of different levels. The first thing is a lot of people that you tell to calm down think they're calm.
Right.
In the first place. So what you're saying is don't be you. That's the first thing. And the second thing is if they perceive themselves that they are not calm, there's a good reason for it, and you are the reason for it. You're the person standing in front of them that's made them not calm, and now you're trying to shut them down when they're trying to express to you what the issue is from their point of view. I think the easiest way for folks to kind of understand this is that when we teach, we often ask our students, what is professionalism, right? It's funny because when we ask a group that, we usually get some trite phrase like in offices all across the country. There's there's like maybe the word says team or professionalism on the wall, and it's got a bunch of people in a rowboat. It says everyone's rowing the same direction, right? There's these motivational statements on the walls and all these other things. But what does professionalism really mean? And what we get most of the time is this, it's some version of how well you do your job. Okay. And one of the points we make, which Doc was so astute in making, says, well, in your organization, are there people that do the job really well, but professional may not be the first word you use to describe them? And then there's usually a bunch of laughter in the room if we happen to be in a room. They go, yeah, there are people in my organization that are really good at their job, but they may not be, seen as the most professional. I said, okay, let's flip the coin over. Are there people in your organization that are seen as professional but aren't that great at their job? And the answer is usually faster. Well, yeah, right? And those are the ones usually management loves, right? So we say, really, then, if professionalism isn't how well you do your job, what is it? And our perspective is that professionalism is how the other person views you. See, all of us have had bad customer service. But when you were dealing with that person over the phone or in person, ask yourself this, and you weren't happy with the end product. You didn't consider them professional. But did they consider themselves professional?
Yeah,
and the answer is what? Yes.
I think there's a sense that, especially with cops and maybe even people that you work with us, like in healthcare and other sort of more stressful dynamic interactions, is, oh yeah, we know all this stuff. And my sense is, you don't, because guys like you and I are standing in front of you talking, or on webinars talking about what you need to do differently, and the usual way that you handle situations that may have worked, 50% or 60% of the time doesn't work for a lot of other people. And I think one of the challenges that we see now, as we look at the public perception from a small, part of the public that hates cops, the defund police and all these other folks, is your work in de-escalation is probably on the top of the list for a lot of people as they look at police training. So, yes. My world in workplace violence prevention typically gets, the phone rings after there's some national incident, which I don't like as a driver for my work, but it is the reality. But it's the same driver for your work, which is, in no time in our, 30 years that we've all been looking at law enforcement, have we seen this movement to get rid of the cops and to minimize what they do. And the idea that in our world, as you well know, millions of contacts with police have no problems at all in routine. And the ones that make the newspaper somehow define the concept of how law enforcement is a failure in this country. So your time now, I mean, the phone has to be ringing for you guys, because it's like, well, our cops need de-escalation training, because that's the key phrase. Our cops need help in dealing with the mentally ill. So the mentally ill population, the racial issues, the de-escalation of angry people, I mean, that's top of mind right now.
Yeah, I think that, it's like, with that, going back to the whole calm down thing, is that folks believe they're calm, even when you don't think they are. And the way to penetrate that is to show some dignity, respect to them, and to acknowledge and try to figure out what's really bothering them in the first place. But you're absolutely right about the whole situation with law enforcement and defund the police. I mean, if we look at what's really happening with COVID, every police agency de facto has been defunded nationally.
Right.
And what I mean by that is that every police agency, and we work with police, military, private companies, Fortune 100, 500 companies, every agency is going to have less tax base going into 21 and 22 because of the economy contracting.
Property taxes,
so
less to be spent.
Yes, even if a local, there are places that have actively defunded the police, like in Minneapolis and Seattle and Los Angeles and some other jurisdictions. But if you look at really, every agency in the country has been defunded. So the question is, it's like, well, why is this? Because like you said, there's literally millions of law enforcement contacts, and some, that do not raise a blip because the officers are professional, they're doing the right thing, and in the areas what they're doing. So why do we have this major, basically professional assault on law enforcement? And the reality is that there are some officers that do horrible things. And nowadays, it's getting captured on video,
right,
more and more often, and then which can be replayed over and over and over again. But the thing that I think is missing in this whole conversation is that some folks are looking at law enforcement, the police agencies, to say, look at those people, they need to be defunded. They're doing horrible things, and they're part of a system that's not fair. And I understand that. And in some cases, they're right. One of the advantages of teaching in a national company is you get to see law enforcement from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic. And not every agency across the country is equally as trained or as competent or historically has been as respectful to its communities.
But I think if you look at just to put a finer point on what you're saying is, I know you know the statistic. I don't remember it specifically, but there's a pretty large percentage of law enforcement agencies in the United States that have 40 or 50 cops or less. So the idea that there are thousands of cops in every jurisdiction. I mean, you and I had the benefit of working for large agencies which had a lot of bodies, for PDs and sheriffs and things where you could bring a lot of resources to bear. But you look where you are and living where you are now and living where I am now. I mean, most of these agencies are very small, and so for us to sort of assume that they all have the same tactical training or the same communications training or the same way of solving problems. And then the other part that's sort of a head scratcher to me, without getting into the whole politics of all this, is you and I saw as kids, we saw the 60s riots and the 70s riots, and then we saw Rodney King riots, after 92. But I never heard defund the police in any of those conversations, post O.J. Simpson, all this stuff. So there was a pretty seismic shift in our country in terms of this defund the police concept. And I never heard it in the 30 years we've been looking at law enforcement. Where do you think that switch got flipped for the defund the police part of it? I mean, there's always been people that are against cops, but I've never heard the defund the police part till now.
Well, I think that has to do is that I think there's folks that honestly believe that some of the systems in society are structured in such a way to the system is rigged against people of poverty and color. Right. And that the way to fix the systems can't be fixed from their perspective. So those systems have to be basically torn down and reassembled. And that a lot of the resources, that there's an inappropriate amount of resources to the actual enforcement and incarceration, and therefore those resources should be shifted to more social programs. Right. But there's no historical, data that says that's going to make anything better. In other words, like, if I'm the victim, if my son or my daughter has been victimized by a violent crime, I'm not going to feel good about the perpetrator being on house arrest. Right.
Or bail, or bailed out 5 minutes after they get there. Yeah.
Right. Or so there's lots of factors. But one of the things that I was talking to a community in Oregon about, was talking to the press. I said, let's have this conversation. Is that you're coming from a perspective that the police department is an occupying force, an occupying malevolent force in your community, and that's just dead wrong. Police officers in a community are the community. They're the sons, the daughters, the fathers, the mothers of the community. Every single police officer, came from the community to become a police officer. And God forbid, unless they die as a police officer in that community, they're going to leave the profession and be in a community. Police officers are the community. And by and large, all the way across this country, communities are not unhappy with their police officers. Like you mentioned, in my area here, I live in Spirit Lake, Idaho. There are nine, I think 10, maximum in my police department, including the chief. Right. So, that's the entire police department for my particular area where I live. Very, very small agency. But I can tell you our community strongly supports our police department. A little larger county agencies within half an hour of me, tremendous support for law enforcement here in the state of Idaho. And that's true all across the country. that there's support where you're seeing these strong shouts for change are usually in urban centers, but not, that have had, maybe in some cases legitimate complaints against their police agencies. So it's not the issue from from my perspective is that if you are unhappy with if you think police officers need to do a better job, then taking money away from the agency doesn't help them do a better job.
Yeah, cutting the training budget doesn't help them with training.
Correct. And so if I want to see a better result, or I want to create a better result, then really I need it's not defund, it's refund. And we should be refunding police training, because as a trainer, the one thing that is the one criticism that is absolutely true about the law enforcement profession is we do not train enough.
And especially for
de-escalation.
what people would call soft skills. So de-escalation is a soft skill, and dealing
Correct.
with the mentally ill is a soft skill, and dealing with people that are homeless is perceived as a soft skill. And so, from my background, I wrote the Contact and Cover book with John Morrison back in 1990. We've been teaching Contact and Cover, since that time span in a 4-hour block around the country. And people love, as you know from your cops, they love to go to tactical training, but anything that's perceived as soft skills or too touchy-feely, or, what do you mean we don't get to use red guns or roll around on the mat or go out and shoot somewhere? They tend to minimize it. And my argument for that is sort of like the argument that I have with cops about using psychological services or employee assistance program or peer support. If you're hurting because of your job, and we know that policing is a psychologically dangerous occupation, the suicide rates through the roof. And if you badmouth EAP, you badmouth peer support, you badmouth psychological services to young coppers that are maybe thinking about reaching out for mental health services because they're hurting because of their job, then you're doing a disservice. And I think it's the same thing in your arena, where we talk about verbal judo, or the joke with you guys. It was always gerbil voodoo and all that kind of stuff that the LAPD guys came up with. And, if we minimize the value of programs like yours to young cops coming up, and they go, "Oh yeah, that's stupid. You don't want to have to go through that," then it does a huge disservice to the culture of the agency, and it drives me crazy. So when I talk to cops and I say, you cannot badmouth employee assistance program if you've never used it. You can't badmouth psychological services if you've never used it. And if you do that, you're doing a harm to your colleagues. And it's just the same with your work as well.
Well, and here's the problem. When it comes to verbal de-escalation, there's no national standard. And so you've got states where there may be as little as 0 to 1 or 2 hours that an officer is taught verbal de-escalation.
Right.
In California, even in the state of California, where it's enshrined in their post policy, that you may get from 8 or more hours. But let's analyze 98% of what an officer does daily is just talk to people. Force is used around 2% or less in most agencies, right? So 98% of the time, you've got officers that talk to folks. But where's the emphasis of training placed in? There are hundreds of hours in firearms training. There are tens of hours in baton and taser, electronic incapacitators training, pepper spray, oleoresin capsicum, the technical term for pepper spray.
Yeah, driving training.
Driving, pursuit driving. And how many hours are mandated for ongoing training of de-escalation? And in most states, absolutely none.
Right.
Some states require a couple of hours every 2 years. That's what the state of California requires. So you initially have your academy training, and then every 2 years you get 2 hours. Most states in the country don't have a standard. So nationally, the thing that officers do the most, they have the least required ongoing training, which is talking to people. So we wonder why we see these YouTube videos where police officers are not doing a good, a good professional job of the way they're communicating. Well, they haven't been given the training to function, and we're asking officers to function under the most difficult circumstances. If I'm talking to somebody on the phone, I'm collecting a bill, they're not going to jump through the phone and try to beat me to death. We're asking them to take the most dangerous and dynamic and rapidly evolving situations and then talk people out of violence. But yet they've been giving so few tools. And so one of the things that we fill that gap as a company at the Verbal Judo Institute, and that's what our founder, Dr. George Thompson, was passionate about. But we believe there should be a national standard for de-escalation, and the hours should be given to the officers because, how do you hold somebody accountable for something they had not been trained for or trained in? And that's a huge issue for us, and we're passionate about that.
And that's what the city attorneys and the DAs and the county councils that have to defend these use of force cases, that's what they cringe about, because the first thing, as you know, from the plaintiff's attorney's perspective is, well, what training have you had in this particular situation, handling people that are mentally ill, or handling people that are under the influence of drugs and alcohol, or handling people that are angry and fearful of suicidal or whatever? And the answer is, well, I got 2 hours in the academy. And so this makes the plaintiff's attorney's job so much easier in these cases and these $1 million settlements for things that rapidly got out of hand. And you've watched a million videos, which is the reason I can't watch cops on TV, that the Fox show, because of just so many tactical errors, where you said, if they had done this or this, it would have changed the whole dynamic of the encounter. If they had done this or this, it would have changed the whole tenure of the encounter. And I think you've got so many examples in your training materials of what didn't work. And talk about the part, I think, that cops sort of grudgingly come to your concept. Because I would talk to cops and go, we thought that was BS, but then we went out and tried it in the field and actually worked. And I go, well, you're welcome. And then thanks Verbal Judo Institute. So this idea that they have to learn by kind of their own baptism.
Yeah, I think it's the good news is that with the modern officers, the people we're training now, the new recruits, people been on just a few years, they fully embrace verbal de-escalation. They see the benefit of it. And it's been an emphasis has been placed on it in many states for such a long time that it's not an issue. It's not an issue for them. But you were right. With some of the folks who've been around for a while, they can come to our training, like, well, you know what? And usually the complaint is, well, you're going to want me to talk when I need to be acting for my safety. And all you want me to do is talk, and I'm going to get hurt because you're going to tell me to talk when I should have been protecting my officer's safety. And one of the things we say is no, far from that. And one of the concepts we teach in verbal judo is a concept called safer, and we teach it, very in the front end of the course. We say, listen, if the security of other people or property is threatened, then we're not telling you to have to talk to this person about how they felt about their childhood growing up. You're going to need to perform an action because people are about to get hurt in front of you, or property is about to get damaged in front of you. If you're attacked, I'm not telling you to ask them what their personal motivation is and if they've been mistreated in their lifetime. You need to handle that attack. If somebody runs away from you, you can't chase them going, is there anything I can say to get your cooperation? You're going to have, you either got to decide whether you're going to pursue or whether you're not. If you're saying the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result, well, some people say that's a definition of insanity, then, you're probably going to need to get into some kind of action. And if the situation radically changes, if you're talking to somebody and all of a sudden they reach into their waistband and you see a dark object coming out of the waistband, you're going to need to do some kind of action consistent with your training. And that's what we call the ACT, is the action consistent with training.
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
so we want you to be
I think
safer.
Doc said don't stop being a cop.
Correct. And but if you don't have any of those things, then what does it hurt to talk to people in a way that they feel dignified? Does it hurt you? Well, no. Then why wouldn't you do it? Because you're more likely to gain their cooperation in the process. And that's and one of the things we say is the goal of professional, we call it, what is professionalism? And we say the goal of professionalism is to minimize potential for resistance and generate voluntary compliance. The officer's job is to minimize potential for resistance and get people to cooperate and comply. And one of the things that we tell officers is that it's not their job to show up cooperative to you. It's your job to get them that way.
Right.
And some of my veteran officers, like, they go, what are you talking about? They're supposed to follow the law. They're supposed to do what I say. and I'm like, and I say to them, hey, listen, do you have children? Yeah. Okay. Do you expect your child, who is made out of your own DNA, who professes to love you and you profess to love it, do you expect that kid to be completely obedient for every moment of the day the minute it wakes up? And usually they'll laugh. Oh, no. Well, why would you expect somebody that you don't know and doesn't share your DNA to do that for you?
And who either hates you or is afraid of you by definition.
Right. And who's under the influence of anxiety, fear, rage, drugs, mental illness, alcohol, right? Why would you expect a person you don't know to be completely cooperative with you when you can't even get your own kid to do so in your own home?
Right.
And usually there's a long pause. And so the truth is, you approach your child is that when they wake up, you understand that it's not their job to be completely submissive and cooperative with you, that it's your job to create an environment that they want to do that. Guess what? Same thing's true when you come to work.
So
it's not that person's job to show up cooperative, it's your job to get them that way. And that's a paradigm shift for some of our experienced officers, because if they make that paradigm shift and they say, you're absolutely right, people have issues that I didn't know prior to the contact. One of the students in a recent class says, really, if you think about it, when you interact with another human being, you're probably interacting with the last 10 interactions they had.
Right.
And so if you have those, if you don't factor that in, because here's that's the linchpin, because if you believe that it's your job to get them cooperative, then you'll do all the techniques we teach. But if you don't, then you're just going to get upset, and you're going to be one of those cops in the videos where you've got bad tone body language, and you're yelling at somebody, calm down.
Right. Well, one of the things that you guys, the benefits I think that you guys have, we got about 3 minutes left here, is verbal judo has become a generic phrase like Kleenex, popsicle, and Xerox. So I know you guys fight against people using your intellectual property, but there is a benefit to people knowing, even folks that aren't in law enforcement know the concept. Verbal judo is, because I get that from my library people, I get it from my taxpayer contact people all the time. Hey, can you teach verbal judo? I go, nope. There's some folks that teach verbal judo, but there's this concept is kind of genericized. So good on you guys for doing that.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things, if you actually break it down, verbal's words in judo is a Japanese word which means ju means gentle and do means way.
Right.
So it's a gentle way of using words. So even though it sounds militaristic and martial artsy, what it really means is using gentle words to get voluntary compliance and cooperation, collaboration.
So I've been talking with Mike Ziggy Siegfried, the Chief Operating Officer for the Verbal Judo Institute. It's a training firm founded by the late Doctor George Thompson. The book exists, Verbal Judo. You can get it on Amazon. You can go to verbaljudo.com. Ziggy, thanks for everything, pal. I appreciate talking to you, and good luck and stay safe and happy holidays, my friend.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And say hi to the fellas for me.
I will. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to Crime Time. My thanks to Jim Whining, producer Matt, producer Jay, and all the good folks at Axe Media Group. I'm Steve Albrecht. Thanks for listening to What I Know Is Right.